Hello everyone, Keith here. So I actually recorded a different video recently on Hamilton specifically. I was gonna make that video, I was gonna talk about why I think Hamilton isn't so popular, especially compared to the other, entry-level Swiss brands like Tissot. But recently something more interesting came out, and that was the Morgan Stanley report for watch sales or watch revenue, turnover, whatever, over 2025. I thought this was super interesting because the chart actually showed a lot of, very interesting and some would argue polarizing changes, mainly in part to Swatch Group as well as Omega specifically. Don't get me wrong, I love Omega. In fact, the very first video I made was on my, Omega Globemaster. This is a watch that I love the brand, and I think they do a lot of cool stuff. But, seeing them fall from grace, I think it was, number 2 last year to number 5 this year. So I thought I wanted to talk about, Omega specifically, but more across the industry on what's happening in this Morgan Stanley report, and also maybe just give some thoughts on how I feel about this entire situation. I'm not going to offer any solutions or whatever, but I would like to talk about why I think this is happening, especially to Omega, because falling, 3 spots is incredibly large for a big brand like it. So I don't really want to get into the numbers, but maybe let's go across the positions of the brands. So the first one that is up there is still Rolex. It's always been Rolex, and it kind of always will be Rolex. I think that's not surprising. Number 2 is Cartier. I think they were number 3 across the previous year, so that's also not very surprising. And then Omega has gone down to number 5 from number 2 previously from previous years. Now in its place, AP and Patek have both moved up, and I think this is not too surprising. I think amongst the high-tier luxury brands, these two are probably the most popular and most well-known. Like if you ask an average person to name a watch brand, for example, they could probably tell you Seiko, they could probably tell you Rolex, but if you were to ask them to name another brand that's very luxurious, they could probably name Patek or AP. Aside from that, everything else below has kind of mostly remained the same. I think the most notable changes below Omega is that Swatch has gone down, while Tudor, which I guess is not too surprising, has gone back up. I think Omega going down and Tudor going up are very telling of how people view buying watches nowadays. Omega has kind of non-stop been chasing after the Rolex market, while Tudor has kind of been eating away at the Omega market. Now, of course, they make very different watches. They are not even close to being the same kind of brand. But at the end of the day, I think Omega is very well known for their tool watches, especially their Seamaster and Speedmaster, while Tudor is obviously known for their divers. So I think there is a significant overlap nowadays between the two brands, especially in the dive segment around the, $3,000 to $6,000 range, where you can start to see people going, should I really spend that much on an Omega Seamaster? I think this is hard because the middle class brand, so I don't know if you would consider Omega a middle class brand because it is pretty expensive. And don't get me wrong, they are proper luxury. But I would say if you don't count the high-end brands, your APs or your Pateks of the world, the middle class brands are around the Omega and below, right? And people's spending power have not really gone up with inflation. Year over year, Omega has raised their prices, and that's not exclusive to Omega, everyone else has raised prices, but I don't think Omega has done enough to differentiate themselves from that, other brands' price raises. For example, I think the Omega catalog is just too bloated. Seriously, it's way too bloated. There's too many Speedmasters, there's too many Seamasters, and they haven't really had a consistent marketing strategy for a very long time. Aside from James Bond, it's very hard for me to pinpoint exactly what would make an average person want to consider buying an Omega. They are getting so close, or some of their models are even around that Rolex range, where if you can get a Rolex, I would say the most amount of normal people would probably go for a Rolex instead. I think the top 5 in this chart really tells you 2 things. One, that people in the lower bracket of that, price tier are just not willing to spend that much money anymore, while the upper class, the very rich, are willing to spend more, and that's why Patek and AP have gone up. The ultra luxury have been doing pretty well, especially in the last few years. They haven't really been moving in their their rankings or whatever, while people in the upper price bracket, the ultra luxury, are more willing to spend money now. And because of that, I think Omega has lost its way a little bit. I think they're not too sure how to target the market. They can't really position themselves in that higher price range, but at the same time, they are still a very big mass market consumer brand. And even Rolex, which also is a mass market consumer brand, they have that level of desirability, that prestige that Omega doesn't quite have. And so trying to price themselves in that tier takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a very different marketing strategy that Omega kind of isn't employing right now. So while they want to move up the tier in price, they haven't really quite shown that in the quality of their watches, which are great, but I wouldn't say they command, the extreme price tags that they do nowadays. and they also just don't know how to get people in the door right now. Aside from, the positioning of their ranking, Omega sales fell. Longines, even though it's maintained its ranking over the last 3 years, has also fallen in sales volume. And actually, across almost the entire industry, the numbers are down. Only a few of the brands are doing pretty good, and part of those brands are actually the ultra luxury, the Pateks, the Rolexes, the APs of the world, Richard Mille, Vacheron. They're all, maintaining pretty steady sales numbers while everyone else has been going down. Right now, in the current state of the world, the middle class is suffering the most. Cost of living is, higher than it's ever been. I think people are more specific with their spending. And so, if you ask a normal person to go out and spend, $7,000, $8,000, even $5,000, $4,000 on a watch, people will look at you and be like, I could put this money somewhere else better. It's easy to think like in our world as watch people, $3,000 or $4,000 is great value for a watch. For like a really good Longines or an Omega if you can buy one used. But in a regular person's mind, spending that much of their paycheck, sometimes more than their month's paycheck on a watch, is absolutely ridiculous. And I think that's why a lot of the industry is struggling right now. Not just Omega, as much as I'm talking about Omega right now because, they've moved down the most. But, I do think that, raising their prices constantly makes it a very hard pill to swallow to buy an Omega. Year after year, I believe they've had price raises. And, even for me, when I bought my Omega, I thought really long and hard about it. It's not an easy purchase decision to make, and it's not something you can just do on a whim. And that's coming from, a watch person. I'm a watch person, but for an average person who's not really into watches, if they're thinking, I'm going to be spending a lot of money, I'm hitting a milestone, I want to get a watch to celebrate it, why wouldn't they just go try and buy a Rolex? Because a Rolex is not that much more expensive than an Omega nowadays. It's not that far apart in price tier. They would probably just go for the Rolex because it has the higher brand prestige. Is Omega appealing to younger people, for example? I don't really know. When I ask my friends how they feel about Omega as a brand, they all think it's pretty cool, the fact that they have the Moonwatch story or the fact that they have the James Bond models, but that's actually all they can name. And that's also all the marketing strategy for Omega has been, which is James Bond and the Moonwatch. For example, I think Tudor has done a remarkable job of positioning themselves, especially amongst young people. More than ever nowadays, I see people close to my age or barely older than me wearing a Tudor Black Bay. I never see anyone wearing an Omega. Never. Here in Singapore at least, the most common watches I see are the Tissot PRX, a Seiko 5, but then it's a Tudor Black Bay. I see a Tudor Black Bay very often. It's just in that price tier where it's luxury enough, like people know it's a luxury watch and it's a very nice watch, it's very well made. But at the same time, people can afford it. People can reasonably afford it without feeling too much of a pinch. And I think that's where Omega falls short. As much as sometimes the marketing strategy for Tudor can be a little bit cringy, what I can say is that it doesn't feel like an old brand. Omega definitely feels like an old brand. It's interesting if you look at Longines as well, because Longines has been doing really good over the last few years with their releases. They've made the Spirit Zulu Time, the very new Spirit Pilot as well, all of which, all the watch people are considering very good value watches or really great, releases from Longines. But at the same time, if you look at their sales numbers, even though they've maintained the position they're at, they've kind of slipped in sales for a very long time. If you look at the sales numbers, they've gone down by a significant amount. I think it's like 18% or something like that. So, all of these problems might not just be exclusive to Omega. It's just easy to single out Omega because, they haven't really been doing too hot in the last few years. They haven't had very interesting releases. Yeah, the only notable release I could think of recently from Omega was probably the Reverse Panda Speedy, and even that was not like a massive hit amongst people. People have very split opinions on that watch. But yeah, if you look at the chart as a whole, most of the industry has gone down. I think a lot of people who even want to get into watches are being priced out of their own price segment. Something that they could afford a few years ago might not be so affordable now. And between picking a quality of life going for a holiday or buying new furniture, it might be more worth it than buying a new watch. So when the economy suffers, I think everyone suffers, and the watch industry suffers because they have no choice but to raise their prices. At the same time, people don't feel like they can afford it, so they don't buy it. So what can Omega do to alleviate its problems? For one, I definitely think culling the catalog is incredibly important. I think they sell way too many watches. Even scrolling through the website is a headache. I literally didn't know they made that many models of the Speedmaster, that many models of the Aquaterra. Do you really need that many? I think it just makes for a very messy look. For a buyer, I think that just creates confusion. They just, endlessly scrolling, not sure which one they should get. And it's just messy. It doesn't look good for a luxury brand. You ideally should have a few models, that's for sure, for each collection. but you know, 100 references for a Speedmaster is just way too many. And I'm not a marketing person, but I definitely think that they should alter their marketing strategy, relying only on James Bond and the Moonwatch. People know about it, but I don't know how much it actually appeals to people these days. I think it's very cool, like the story is very cool, James Bond is cool, but you know, there's no James Bond movie now for the next few years, so we're not gonna have an Omega watch for that also. And so just relying on these two is just not enough. They gotta seem less boomer, you know? What can I say? Another thing I think they should definitely do is try making smaller watches. Especially in the last like 3 years or so, the trend has been going downwards, you know, smaller sizes. I can't wear a 42mm Seamaster. It's just way too big for my wrist. A lot of my friends cannot wear a 42mm Seamaster. Most of my friends can't. My friends and I all have very similar wrist sizes, all about, you know, 16 to 7, slightly under 17 centimeters or so, some even smaller than mine. And Omega kind of hasn't really appealed to that smaller watch market. Look at Tudor, they've made the Black Bay 54. That works for women because it's such a small size, but it still works for men too. It looks great on people. So I think it would be good to start making smaller watches. As cool as the Omega movements are, I'm sure they have a way to shrink it down to make it smaller. The 38mm Aquaterras are great. I don't see why they can't, you know, try and make a smaller Speedmaster, try and make a smaller Seamaster. If a Seamaster came in 39 or 38mm, I would genuinely consider one because I think the Seamaster is great. I just wish it was smaller. I can't wear a 42mm Seamaster at all. And lastly, it's the price. I know that watch brands kind of raise their prices to fight the economic inflation. Parts are getting more expensive. Hiring people is probably more expensive nowadays. But I do think that they are aggressively overpricing. And you can tell just from the trading market, once you go out to sell your Omega watch, you are probably only going to get back at most 70% of the price of that. You are probably not going to get any more than that. And as a luxury brand that's especially trying to chase Rolex, that's quite a hard fall off. People don't value Omega like they do a Rolex. And that's why the trading market is so much lower and people would just rather buy used. I bought my Omega Glowmaster used. I was never going to pay for full retail price for that. And so I think Omega just needs to recognize who they're trying to appeal to. And I think right now they're just not appealing to the mass market or the biggest crowd that they can. Omega enthusiasts will be Omega enthusiasts. They'll probably still buy Omegas, but if you want to survive as a mass market watch brand, you can't just appeal to the enthusiasts. You kind of have to appeal to everyone. And right now, they're not appealing to everyone, like Rolex is, like Patek is. But hey, let me know what you guys think. How do you guys feel about Omega nowadays? Like I said, I like the brand a lot, but yeah, I wouldn't go out and recommend someone to buy an Omega as like a really good value watch. Nowadays, if someone wanted to buy a watch, I'd tell them to buy a Longines if they have the budget for it. If they don't want a Longines, just go buy a Seiko, man. Like for me, recommending an Omega is just a bit difficult nowadays. And I don't think I'm the only one with that opinion. I think a lot of people feel that way about Omega as well. Omega years ago was made for the everyman, you know, everyone who wanted to afford a very nice luxury watch could buy an Omega. They were value for the tech inside their movements. And now they're not quite that, you know, that same hallmark anymore. They don't have the best value movements for sure, and they don't even have the best tech in their movements anymore. So I think either they need some crazy innovation or at least slow down the aggressive pricing on their models. And cut the catalog, please. There's way too many watches. But yeah, have you bought an Omega recently? How do you feel about the brand? Let me know in the comments. I love to read it. And yeah, I'll still make that Hamilton video, I swear. It's coming. But anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and look out for more watch content. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Take care.